We're live. Hello.
Hey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Django Wexler. It's great to see everybody. We're having a little bit of technical failure in some places here, so let us know if you can't see or hear any of us at any point. But yes, I'm Django Wexler. I'm the author of Ashes of the Sun and most recently Siege of Rage and Ruin, which came out a couple weeks ago. Or I guess last week. God, what is time anymore? So I do adult fantasy and YA fantasy and middle grade fantasy and all kinds of things. And it's great to be here talking to you, Devin.
Oh, it's excellent to be here. So I'm Devin Madson. I am the author of We Ride the Storm and We Lie with Death that just came out today, I guess, American time. It was yesterday for me because I am in the future.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So it's actually Wednesday for me here, lunchtime, stomach rumbling. A couple of people are commenting on my shirt. So
it's my birthday in your time zone already.
Oh, is it? Well, happy birthday.
Yeah, my birthday is tomorrow. So.
Well, happy birthday from Futureland.
Thank you.
For tomorrow. But yes, my t-shirt is, I have a #kill t-shirt here because the first printing of this book in the UK had a typo on the fourth word of the entire book that was kill with an extra. And I decided to just run with it. And so this is my special commemorative t-shirt for my excellent typo. So I'm going to go straight in it, and we're going to have a look at a question. Okay, so our very top question is, do you have any productivity hacks or software that you use to keep you on task when you write? Asking for a friend. Totally asking for a friend. Do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I feel like these things are really individual. So like this may, these are little things that may or may not be of use to any person. I've found many things that aren't of use to me that in writing books or whatever. I have a laptop. I tend to do all my writing while I'm just like sitting on a couch rather than at a desk. And my laptop doesn't have much installed except for Word and my web browser. So it doesn't, and in particular, it doesn't have links to like Twitter and all that stuff. So that helps. Just like, not like even blocking it, but just the fact that I would have to get up and cross the room to work on Twitter definitely helps me stay a little bit on task. For me, though, the biggest thing is routine. I like to have a very steady routine for my work. So like every day I finish lunch and then I start working and I work for a little while and I take a break and go for a walk. And then I do some more work and then I have dinner, and like the sort of regularity of it helps a lot. And then like back when I was not writing full time, my writing time was before work. So I'd wake up every morning and do a little writing and then go to work. So whenever you can sort of find time for it, that's what's worked for me. I don't know. What about you, Devin?
I have tried lots of different things because I have an issue with like obsessive stuff and hyperfocus. So, I can accidentally spend 4 hours looking for jigsaw puzzles. Maybe that happened the other day. Maybe it didn't. and just not know where that time went. So I have most recently found that I use an app called Forest, which forces me to sit and focus for like a specific set amount of time. And if you leave the app while it's running, the tree that you are growing dies. And I have a lot of plants, so this is extremely motivating for me not to kill the trees. So it forces me to not look at my phone for the entire time that I'm doing it. Like you, I also have so the computer that I write on has the internet, but I'm not logged in on Twitter. I don't have my email set up. I don't have anything. So the only thing I can do with it is like look up stuff for like research purposes. Otherwise, it's just working, and I find that is really, really helpful. And I use like my admin email stuff on a different computer.
Yeah, the key is not so much that it doesn't have internet, although that's true for some people because they get lost in research. But it doesn't have any pop-ups. It doesn't have anything that can like arrive, like a tweet or an email or something that'll be like, oh, hey, look at me.
Yeah. But I also found actually turning all those notifications off on my phone really useful as well. Yeah. So they're now only there if I go to like particularly look for them. I also use a program called Pacemaker, which will calculate how many words I need to do per day in order to reach a particular goal, and you can put in like multiple projects, and it gives you like a whole calendar. So I do that, and I also keep like a sprint diary. So I found that was really good, because then I used to just work and then stop and then kind of just not go back to it. But if I write the next time that I'm going to start, and then I sit down and I do half an hour, I find that works. And so I'm not allowed to leave the desk until I've written a new time. And recently it got so, with the world being the way it is and deadlines being what they are, I had to start giving myself a sticker every time I did one, like I was 5.
No, that's
I find like
it's a great excuse to buy cool stickers, which is obviously
right.
It's myself.
Yeah. They've got lots of good stickers. So I think, definitely finding what works for you and your brain, because I have tried a couple of things that just really didn't work for me, and I have to have that. See, routine, I can't routine because I have a 5-year-old. So I have to find other ways to kind of work around all of those things. So yeah,
that's tough. What was I going to say? Oh, I had something and I lost it. So like, I don't know, if you live in the US especially, these are slightly crazy times, and maybe give yourself a break. It's okay if I didn't get a lot done last week, and that's probably fine. People will forgive you.
Yeah, there was a coup. It's okay.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on, yeah. So I feel that, see, if I didn't have deadlines at the moment, I wouldn't be quite so hard on myself about it. But, deadlines will deadline.
All right. Use the ask a question box to ask questions, and we will sort of trade off going through them. So the next question on the list is, why are empires? Oh, hey, my video for Devin just came back. Why are empires? Isn't the kingdom good enough? But seriously, why do you think we're so attracted to government systems in fantasy books that are different from the modern ones we live under?
Well, I think for me, that's kind of like, there's a couple of elements of that. Like we have that, we still kind of want to write a kind of escapism, but also because in my case, it's like, well, I have a lot of things that I want to say about the way that we, like governments and societies run. But if I write about them in talking about like a kind of a modern democracy setting, it feels too close to home. And I feel like for me, that is more difficult to work with. And also for my readers, that would be more difficult to work with, because it's likely to remind them of all of the current problems that they're going through, which will break their sense of escapism and also make them, I guess, more upset by the bad things that are happening when it's more of a thought exercise. So that's kind of my thought on it. And also, it's kind of fun to go as big and crazy as you possibly can sometimes in fantasy. And so empires kind of have that large scale, so much stuff can be going on. It's kind of fun to work with.
I mean, for me, I think there's sort of two routes to that answer. The first one is that, kingdoms and empires were kind of the normal state of humanity for almost all of history up until relatively recently. And so most of what we do in fantasy, we're getting away from everything having to be, 13th century England, but it's still sort of based on some past historical period. And so, a lot of that ends up with kingdoms and empires, because that's mostly what you had in, pre 1700 or whatever. I mean, with some exceptions, obviously. The historian in me is like, no, wait, but what about, and I'm like, calm down. The other thing is that kingdoms are really useful from a narrative point of view, because it helps to focus the story and the events on a few people which makes the story sort of easier to keep track of, and more about one small group of people. Sometimes unrealistically so, but like if you think about like if you're trying to do a modern democracy in a fictional context, just how many characters there would be to keep track of, all these people who have some important role to play. Whereas at least you can sort of pretend in a kingdom context that you've got, the king and his advisors and his son and a few nobles, and that's all the sort of important people of the kingdom that matter. Again, the historian.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, realistically, there's probably a lot more people. Even George Martin's books don't have enough characters. Narrative.
Yeah.
But yeah,
keep it easy for us.
That's why I think it's a thing that we write a lot about.
Yeah, the power structures are quite interesting in there, and you can also therefore have a lot more situations where it's like against kind of one person as well. When you have a despotic king,
like it's really matter if they're the prince or whatever. Whereas like even
yeah.
Although you have to be a little careful that those of us who write fantasy, I think, to not just fall into a sort of uncritical adoration of like monarchy because like there's a lot of problems with monarchy. There's reasons why we got rid of it, and you don't want to write something that's basically like monarchy's great as long as the king is a good person.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
So that's something I've been thinking about a lot recently.
Yeah, actually, when I first started this series, so it's called the Reborn Empire, and it kind of is the destruction and recreation of an empire is sort of the idea. And it's funny, when I started it, it was like I had this idea of where it was going to go in that, and then the more I kind of wrote it and dug into it, the more I realized that the empire is like flawed, and like do they really want to go back to the way it previously was, and not consider different ways that they could like kind of construct their political society? Why just return to a previous state when you could make adjustments?
The empire has a Byzantine flavor, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
It's kind of it's a little bit more Asian, I think.
Okay.
But the Levanti, who are the kind of ones who come from across the sea, are like kind of like horse nomads with very Egyptian names.
Okay, interesting. All right, do you want to pick a question?
Yeah.
There's a very slight delay here, which makes my interaction somewhat awkward at times. Perils at the other side of the
planet. Did any real-life battles inspire your combat sequences?
For me, in Shadow Campaigns, which is my previous fantasy, sort of adult fantasy series, absolutely, because it's almost literally based on the career of Napoleon, and so there's a lot of battles of that in there. There's the Italian campaign is in there, and some of the Egyptian stuff is in there, and various other things. In Ashes of the Sun, less so, because Ashes of the Sun is much more about magical people fighting with flaming swords than it is about sort of mass combat, and so there's less possibility for sort of historical battles. Although, I try to keep my history in mind, but Shadow Campaigns is really, it was originally intended, actually, David Drake and Steve Sterling did a series called The General, which is basically the campaigns of Belisarius, but in a kind of sci-fi setting. And my original idea for those books was to do something similar to that, where it was sort of a very thinly fictionalized version of the Napoleonic Wars. And what I ended up doing is not quite that, because it diverges much more plot-wise, but the characters sort of take on a life of their own. But some of the big historical events and battles still have a lot of real-life inspiration.
Well, that's really cool. I don't actually have an awful lot of military history as knowledge, I have to say, though what I do have was entirely an early obsession that I had with the campaigns of Hannibal. So, I think most of the battle sequences that happen in We Ride the Storm probably got a little bit of Hannibal. So nothing was like kind of directly, copied or like used as an example. But that was pretty much my only battle understanding is everything that Hannibal did.
I mean, in fairness, real world generals have been trying to copy Hannibal at Canny for 2000.
Yeah. That is absolutely my favorite battle of his. Obviously, I mean, it's the famous one. It was pretty spectacular, and there is definitely a flavor of that in the Battle of Rician that happens in my first book, for sure.
All right, what else we got here? This is one for the end, so I'm going to scroll one further down. If you consider language to have power, what was an early experience where you learned that fact?
Oh gosh, that's a deep question.
Is that something that is directly comes up in your book? I haven't.
No, not specifically.
There's
like in my
like that in Shadow Campaigns. But go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, you've got something in mind. You start.
Oh, no, wait, but an early experience of that, man. I don't know.
Maybe personally.
For me, it was just the experience of writing. When I was a kid, I was often unhappy, often kind of bored. I didn't do well I did well in an academic sense, but not emotionally in our traditional schooling system here. And, fantasy and novels in general were always this wonderful way to escape. I used to be that kid who carried a book literally everywhere he went. And so, that power of the written word really meant a lot to me at the time. So that would probably be where it came from for me. In Shadow Campaigns, there are sort of specific words that literally summon demons and do magic, which is actually owes more to the demons in Shadow Campaigns probably go back to Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash and the idea that there are these like living creatures expressed as particular strings of language that can like move from mind to mind across generations, something like that, and they get called demons. But that's kind of where that came in. Honestly, Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash was pretty formative. I think I read that at like 16 and it blew my mind.
It's funny thinking about the things that we read early that kind of looking back, we wonder, were we actually ready for some of these? When I was writing middle grade books, I had to ask my editor, I'm like, is this appropriate? And she's like, well, just think of the books you read when you were 12. And I'm like, you mean like Dune? Like, there were a lot of things that I read when I was 12 that were not appropriate, and I probably shouldn't have. But yeah, the amount of 12-year-olds that I know who had formative experiences of reading Stephen King, it's like, okay. That's a whole thing, yeah.
I saw a wonderful...
in terms of I don't go. Yeah.
I saw a wonderful thread the other day from a guy describing how he got into horror, and he's like, when I was like 10 or 12, my parents wouldn't buy me objectionable books, and they judged that entirely by the covers. And so I wasn't allowed to read any romances because they had these lurid covers, and I wasn't allowed to read most fantasy, but I was allowed to read horror, especially like the Stephen King books, because the cover would usually just be like a house with a creepy moon or whatever. It wasn't like obviously bad. And so the guy's like, I actually ended up reading a lot more inappropriate stuff, but like, that got me into horror. Sorry, you were about to say
amazing. I love it. Oh dear. On the language having power, I guess I think so. Not an early, not an early experience, but I think my most kind of thoughtful experience with the idea of language having power is in how language helps you with your sense of identity, and that while we sometimes, and often in society use labels in negative ways, to kind of ostracize people into an us and them category, which is, like I didn't have a great experience in my schooling either. But as an adult, being able to then use those kinds of descriptive language to understand yourself, the kind of freeing nature of that, I have found in my adulthood to be really extremely powerful. To be able to reclaim, to be able to have words to sort of describe myself, to be kind of happily able to say, this is me, with various words to say. That I think has been my most powerful sense of language. That's not just as a sense of escapism and everything, but as a sense of being able to say, well, here are the words that is like this is me, and to find a sense of calm in that, I think, has been really great. Are we shifting to a new question? I will have a look. All right. What have we got? We have, okay. How do you approach world building for your books? And is there a specific aspect that you really nerd out on?
Oh, man.
I'm guessing it's history.
Yeah, it is history. It's funny. I hated history in high school. I mostly hated it in college. I got into history towards the end of college, when I wasn't taking any classes, but I was doing wargaming with my friends Neil and Jim, and started asking questions about some of the stuff they were doing, and they gave me all these great history books. And I learned how much fun history was when you can read about only the parts that interest you, and you don't have to like try to be broad-based. You can just sort of pick the thing that you're interested in, which was often the military stuff for me, but every so often there's some other thing too, and I can just kind of do a dive on that and not have to do a general survey course. And that's been really fascinating. So my interest in history has been extensive, but somewhat non-systematic. So for me, world building, is always about history. I like to, to start world building, I usually try to think of a historical period that sort of roughly approximates the features I want in the fantasy world, and then try to work out the magic system to make those features work, and consider how that would have changed historical development and what the cultures are going to adapt to, whether there's magic or whatever. So the other thing about world building is I always try to match it to the story I'm telling. For me, that's like the best part of fantasy. Excuse me, is you can like connect. You can design the world to make telling the story that you want to tell easy. Obviously, you don't want things to be too easy on the main characters, but that's not what I mean. It's like you can make it so that whatever aspect your story is about is sort of emphasized. If your story is about sort of personal struggle and valor, then maybe you have a magic system where individuals are really powerful and their battles determine the fate of nations, and then what one person does is like super duper important. Or in the shadow campaigns, because I knew I wanted to do these big battles with musketry and cannons, and I wanted that to be very important, the magic system is much subtler and less flashy than in Ashes of the Sun or some other books. Like, it's not a kind of Robert Jordan or Malazan Book of the Fallen, where mages can kind of destroy a whole army with a wave of a hand. Because then what's the point? Who cares about all this army stuff if what's really important is the So you kind of set the stage in a way that emphasizes what you want to tell.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm one of those world-building pantsers who doesn't really think too much about things and just kind of is surprised by the details that I put in as I go. But the thing that I do put a lot of thought into and geek out about is definitely the magic system, because for me, I like everything to not just have internal consistency, but to make kind of a sort of scientific sense. If that, for magic totally needs to be scientific, right? So I actually, long ago, actually invented a character who is essentially, so he's just absolutely obsessed with finding out everything that he can about this magic system. It's based on soul magic and reincarnation. And so he just constantly is testing and asking questions. And so that allowed me to then kind of test all of the various limits and ask all the questions, because I had a character who I was kind of doing it through. He shows up in We Ride the Storm as the witch doctor, and he shows up again in We Lie with Death briefly, and and it was really fun to be able to sit and go, well, if this is the way it works, then what would happen if you did this, and what would happen if you do that? And so that's kind of where I sit whenever I start a new set, because I write all of my books in the same world. So when I write a new thing, I'm like, well, which aspect of this am I going to kind of poke and stretch and find out how far it goes and how awful it would be to live with this time? So it's been good fun.
Actually, Devin, can I ask you a question specifically? Only if something you don't mind talking about. Can you talk at all about your sort of journey to publication? Because I know your book was originally self-published, right? Because I first heard about it when it was being praised to the skies on Our Fantasy as part of SFPBO, years ago. And now obviously it's from Orbit. Can you talk about that at all and what that was like?
Yeah. Well, it was really interesting in that, I didn't self-publish because I had been knocked back by traditional publishing, but because I am really impatient and like to do things for myself, and hate having a boss and all of those things.
I
so I was just like, I'm just going to do this. This is back in 2013. When I first self-published a book, so We Ride the Storm was the start of my second series that I was self-publishing, and I had just come off the back of winning the Australian Fantasy Award for my novella In Shadows We Fall. So I was kind of feeling like maybe I could actually do this, and maybe I don't suck after all, and hey, let's do this. And so I actually had enough confidence to kind of poke some reviewers, to put it into the Scrippo again, those kinds of things. And I was really just impressed at that people actually really liked it, and that was cool. And I was like, all right, well, maybe I can make a go of this slowly. Doing a thing, and I was just planning on doing that, and then I think it was in January of 2000 and oh my god, what is time? 19. I just got an email out of the blue. I hadn't done anything. I had sent out a couple of submissions to a few agents on a completely different project in the middle of the year before, and kind of decided that I was going to shelve that project for a while and move on. So I was doing absolutely nothing except preparing to bring out the second book. And I just got this email, hey, we read your things, interested. Are you interested in us considering this? And I thought it was a joke. So I had to actually Google, Nivea Evans, the editor who sent me the email. I was just like, is this person real? I'm like, oh, she has a Twitter account that looks legit, and her email address looks legit, and this is a thing. So yeah, and it kind of just went from there, So they discussed it for a while, made an offer on the series as well as the prequel, the previous trilogy that I'd done, and here we are. However many months later this is, finally bringing out the second book.
It's fascinating to me because I feel like 25 years ago, it would have had to be a joke. Like this never happened, right?
Yeah.
You know, people out of the blue, but like the sort of self-publishing revolution has changed the way, and it's still changing the way the industry works. That's really neat. Well, thank you. Thank you for indulging me. All right.
It was quite wild.
Let me pick another question off the list here. In both of your series, you write for multiple characters who have their own motivations and agenda for fighting on different sides of a war. What's your secret for making each POV compelling?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Like to be extremely, brief, it's always just make them people. But I don't know. I don't do a lot of planning. I just kind of consider. When I wanted to write for We Ride the Storm, the people who were on, like it's kind of a clash of cultures in a way. And so I wanted to have a person who was from each of the cultures. And then I just went, okay, well, what kind of person are they in society? So, we have a princess, we have an assassin who's also a whore, and a warrior, to be really like just broad, so that I could bring the multiple amounts of experiences to this story that I could. And then I just kind of considered, well, what do they want? Who are they? And like, I guess you have to be able to show the world from their point of view, so you have to be able to let go of the idea that you're going to, in each point of view, be kind of generous about all of the other people in the story. So if this particular group of people don't like that particular group of people, you just got to accept that that's the way that they're going to talk and view the world and act, without thinking, but hang on, we're also supposed to like those other group of people. I think that's one of those steps that you kind of have to take as an author when you're learning to write multiple points of view, is to entirely let go of all of the other points of view and not worry that your readers are going to dislike others or think badly of the person that they're reading because they dislike others. You just have to be true to exactly the complexities of who that person is.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think my answer is pretty similar, which is, I try to make sure that these characters that we can believe that they believe in their point of view and motivations, right? That from their history and the way they view the world and what they know about the world, the things that they're doing make sense. They're not sort of just evil or deluded. That doesn't make for like a great point of view character. These are people who, even though they may be working at cross purposes to each other, it's because they view the world in different ways or, have different interests in mind. In my book, the points of view came from, if you haven't looked at the synopsis, basically the book is about Star Wars, is what I like to say. And in Star Wars, there's this group of people called the Jedi, and they kidnap children and induct them into their like weird monastic order and brainwash them. And in actual Star Wars, there's the Force, and that makes it all work out because, the Force wouldn't let you do this to people who are not actually okay with it. But like, I was like, well, what if, you had a sort of similar setup in a world where you don't have a kind of omnipotent quasi-deity telling you that it's all okay. And that was sort of the inspiration for the core of this book. And so we have this brother and sister, and the sister is taken off to the Twilight Order to be a wandering magical ass kicker, and the brother is kind of upset about it. And they grew up to have very different ideas about the sort of central philosophy of life. But I wanted them both to be sort of reasonable, so that as best as possible, when they're sort of arguing about it or sword fighting about it, you don't know which person is right, or there's no sort of obvious answer. And that's kind of how I approach balancing those two POVs in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would definitely agree with that. That idea that the reasonableness, I think, is important. That you can totally see where everybody is coming from in this discussion, and yet they can't agree.
Right.
Makes for a great conflict. All right, let's have a look for another question. All right, our top one is, you get to go 1 versus 1 against a villain. Oh, it disappeared. Oh, from any medium or franchise. Who is your ultimate baddie, and do you have a chance of winning?
Wait, so are we picking the villain so that we do have a chance?
Yeah, you're going to fight a villain. Who are you going to fight?
Are there franchises where the villains are small children? Is it a fist fight? Can I play them in like Warcraft? Because otherwise,
yeah, okay, I think
do that well.
Answer on whether you have a chance of winning is probably just going to be no.
Yeah. I don't know, like maybe it could be Gollum from Lord of the Rings. He doesn't look that tough. I probably just pick him.
Yeah. Yeah, that would work.
But probably not is the answer. A lot of my heroes are very strong and tough and good with weapons, which are not traits that I have. Here in the 21st century, I mostly sit at a desk and type.
Yeah. So. That's my main skill too. But I would have to say, if I had to choose an ultimate baddie to die against, I would definitely choose Sephiroth from the Final Fantasy franchise, because at least it would be really, really glorious, and I could just enjoy his glorious appearance while I die. That would be good.
If I'm being clever about it, I'd pick one of those anime villains whose goal is to bring like ultimate happiness to the world in some like utopia, because then at least you get to live in utopia, even if it kind of sucks, right?
You'd still be alive, right?
It's kind of like when people ask the like, what fantasy universe fantasy or sci-fi universe would you like to live in? Like, I don't want to pick the exciting one because it doesn't say whether you get to be the protagonist or not. I'm like, I want to live in like Peter Hamilton's Commonwealth universe, because things are pretty awesome for ordinary people. You don't have to be the protagonist.
Yeah.
He lives in this like post scarcity sci-fi world where everything's pretty great, unless you're the guys who go out and find aliens.
Yeah, or you happen to be one of the rich elite people, and that's about it. Yes, right. It would be very good theme music.
All right. Thank you, David, All right. Did you always intend the story to be a series, or did it grow out of one initial book idea?
Oh, I think so. For me, series has kind of come about because the stories I envision just get really big. So the first time I actually sat down to write a story, so I was 19 or whatever I was when I first sat down to write like my first kind of fantasy story, and it was meant to be a trilogy, and it was 800,000 words that I wrote in about 6 months. And it was just like it was huge, and it was awful. It was also really, really terrible. Right? Yeah. So it was just that realization that like I keep wanting to explore, and I keep wanting to push things, and so the idea of doing a small thing is really difficult. Like, I could only write the novella that I've written because it was a prequel to a story that I already knew more about. So I didn't have to keep exploring the kind of content and the characters of it, because I already had in other books. So I think for me, it's just like I don't ever really think about how many books it's going to be, and I don't really plan too much in the sense of like thinking about them as individual books. The story just gets too big.
Sorry, turned off my mic there for a second.
Yep,
So I'm similar. I mean, I've gotten better over the years at telling what size an idea is. Not great. If you look at my Twitter, we released a cover for a book called Hard Reboot today. And the origin of that was that we did this anthology of swordswoman ex-princess stories called Silk and Steel, and I had to write mine.
yeah.
And I was supposed to write a 7,500 word story, and it ended up being 33,000 words long. And so I'm like, well, that's not going to work. And so I had I wrote a different story for the anthology, and we took this to Tor.com, and they took it. So that was obviously kind of a failure. But for Shadow Campaigns, I knew it would be at least 3 books, but when my agent forced me to actually outline it, it turned out to be 5. Since then, I've been better. I'm a better outliner than I was, 10 years ago. So I've generally had a pretty good sense of what my series look like about the time that I sit down and brainstorm, and then by the time I've kind of worked out the outline enough to start writing, I pretty much know where it is.
Well, that's good. That's a good thing to be able to learn. I hope I will also earn this skill with time.
Not everyone has to. I mean, I always say writing process is personal, and it's just, whatever works for you. But like for me, for sure, like the story is basically my agent made me do an outline because he's like, publishers are going to require this before you actually can sell this book. And I'm like, I don't want to. So I spent a month writing this outline. It was horrible, and I hated it. But then I had written the first book. But when I finally went to write the second book after we sold it, and I had the outline, I could not help but notice how much easier it was, and how much less kind of like, I'm going to have to tear up these 3 chapters and start over I did. It was much faster. And I'm like, oh God. So writing these outlines is horrible, but I still have to do it because it makes the end product work better for me. And again, not true for everyone. Don't take anyone else's writing process, for your own, but that was my experience.
Oh, that's really good. All right, let's have a look. And, all right, if your current series was adapted into a different medium, what would you like to see it as? TV show, film, animated, graphic novel, video game, etc.
I almost always say animated for me. It depends on the series. Ashes of the Sun for sure. It's very anime-esque, frankly, but like it's very high magic. People are throwing fire around and blowing things up, and there's horrible twisted monsters. And so, you couldn't do it in live action unless you had, a fantastic budget and James Cameron to do it for you or something. But I would love to see it as an animated series. Actually, my agent asked me to write something that he could sell to Hollywood because he's like, all your books would be way too expensive. You gotta tone it down. Maybe write something with just normal humans. But yeah, I'd say my favorites would be animated, and either Ashes of the Sun or some of the middle grade stuff I've done, which has all these like bizarre creatures in it, which I love doing, would be a lot of fun as an animated series. Shadow Campaigns would be fun as a live action series, but there the problem is not so much magic as you need like a cast of thousands to do all the army parts, which would be a lot of fun to watch, but probably not all that likely. What about you, Devin?
I think so. I am a really not visual imaginer. That idea of when you kind of are reading a book and you see it in your head. I kind of envy the people who can see the movie of a book in their heads while they're reading, because I don't even know what my characters look like. So for me, I think I would have to go with like a TV series, because I can't envision it myself. So I would want to be able to like see it all in the kind of realistic way that it ought to be imagined for like what I was kind of getting across. Although in my case, at least, the magic is reasonably kind of more like in special powers that people have. So it's less showy and flashy. It's a little bit more Game of Thrones in that way, that it's mostly just about people making decisions that maybe they shouldn't have made. So I think it would probably do fairly well as and not be quite as expensive as yours as a live action thing. But yeah, I think it's just, I would love to see it in that way, because I can't imagine it.
Are you also bad at the fan casting game where you try to come up with people who would play your characters? I'm terrible at it.
Could not. I've got no
remember
idea
people's names, so I can be like, that guy from that one movie, right? But like, I can't see things that way.
No.
People often ask, or occasionally ask that question, and I'm like, I don't know, man. You tell me.
Yeah. No, and my partner, we have this thing where he knows so much about like actors and TV shows, and he remembers names of things, and he can remember everything that they've been in. And so he'll like start a conversation. He's like, oh, and he'll say the actor's name, and I just stare at him blankly. And then he'll go through a list of movies and TV shows that they've been in, and I'll just keep staring at him blankly. And this has become a basis of our relationship.
Yes, my wife and I have some similar things, although I'm often the one who provides the media trivia in our relationship. Not so much actors, but like lines and stuff. I have an astonishingly useless ability to remember stupid lines from TV shows from 30 years ago. So, if you ever need something like that, if you need any line from The Simpsons before, 1991, just let me know. I'm here.
It's your special superpower.
It's my superpower. That and being able to hear cell phones recharging. Neither one of them is all that useful.
It's not very useful. Oh, I love it.
All right. Let's see. What's the most exciting part of starting a new project?
Ooh. Everything. I love starting a new project. The blank page itself is really quite daunting, because you have to think up, like, I can't write until I have a first line. So I will spend like multiple days thinking about like the coolest first line I can come up with before I can actually do anything. But I really enjoy making, notes, and just kind of, my favorite thing in my worlds is the connections between characters, and the various ways that I will be able to kind of like twist things and shift things and make conflict for them more difficult because of the way they're connected to this or that. And so my favorite thing is when I'm sitting and kind of making initial notes about characters and motivations and maybe things that might happen, having those realizations where you can go, oh, and then I can do this to them. And that's my favorite.
That's great. It's funny about the first lines. That's like often the last thing I come up with. I know what happens. I often have the scene, but I don't. The actual first line is very rarely. For me, it's weird. I've actually come to love the outlining phase because it's like, it's the point where I get to like mess around with ideas the most, and kind of outline this broad sweep of things without having to do all this sort of gritty detail. And that's really satisfying. It's often kind of painful when you get back to it later and you're like, oh no, there's all these things I didn't think of and now I have to do them. But like that initial thing, it kind of gives you a hit of the emotions of the book, at least for me. Without having to do all of the work. And so it's, that's a pretty good part. So yeah, the feeling, the other thing, I guess starting a new project for me is its own reward. Sometimes people are like, you just finished a project, take a break. And I'm like, no, you don't understand, right? by the time I finish a project, I've been like holding myself back from moving on to the next project for like a month or more. I'm just like, I want to do cool new things, but I can't do it yet. I got to finish this, got to bear down. And then once I bear down, I'm like, ooh, I can do cool new things. And that's like the fun part.
Yeah, shiny thing.
Yeah, I need to take a break. This is the break. All right, we have time for one or two more questions.
All right, let's have a quick look. All right, so what's the most amusing or ridiculous historical fact or anecdote you've come across while researching for your books?
Okay, this is off the top of my head, so if I get some of the details wrong. But this is my story that I tell for explaining why actual history is so much more random and confused than like any fiction. So in the 1920s, Greece was at war with Turkey, or what is now Turkey. And the war was going along until the king of Greece was walking in a garden and his dog was attacked by a rogue monkey. And the king went over to rescue his dog, but in the process, a second rogue monkey bit the king, and the wound got infected, and he died. And the leadership of Greece changed, and it changed the course of the war and possibly all subsequent history, because the king happened across these monkeys, which are not even native to Greece. They had escaped from someone's menagerie. And I'm like, you couldn't put that into a book and have people believe it, right? Like, it's just not dramatically satisfying. Like, if in Game of Thrones, oh wait, the war ended because Tywin Lannister was bitten by a rogue monkey? Like, no one would buy it. So it's this kind of thing that really drives home just the level of random crap that history is full of. So that's my story.
Yeah, I love it. That's an excellent story. I didn't do very much historical research for my stuff, but I do have a friend who is so extremely deep into random historical trash at the moment, and she will occasionally just send me these like screenshots of the most crazy things that happened that you just are like, what? Yeah, so we now have an ongoing in-joke where we talk about how terrible various people from history are, but we say, but at least they didn't collect giants because of Frederick William of Prussia, who collected giants. And it's just like, I'm sorry, what? He collected what? So that's now our super low bar for how terrible historical figures are. Did they collect giants?
That's a pretty low bar.
Yeah.
All right. One more question.
One more.
You both write a ton. How do you relax and refill your creative wells? I don't know who's calling me, but they can.
Well, I'll answer it while you're dealing with your phone.
Sorry about that. My phone brings through to Google, which is like connected to my computer. It's terrible. Go ahead.
Technology. So I kind of am terrible and refill my creative wells by starting a new project or having multiple projects on the go because I have massive work issues. But otherwise, I try to force myself to step aside, do some jigsaw puzzles. I play video games. Although the last video game that I played was Final Fantasy, and that was back in like April. So it's kind of, I have to force myself to do this, and it's all the usual things. Yeah, I read, I watch things, and I rewatch a lot of things. I find that that's the only way I can kind of comfort and calm down is by rewatching and rereading particular media because I know how it's going to go and I don't have to stress about it.
Yeah, no, that for real. I feel that. My wife and I have been rewatching some stuff because. When the news gets really stressful, it's nice to watch something and you're like, oh, I know how this is going to go. I can appreciate its craft without worrying too much. I'm pretty similar. I don't think I work as hard as you do. But I do a lot of video gaming these days. Probably the thing I missed most in COVID times is being able to play board games with my friends, which used to be a sort of major source of relaxation. I was very into various board games, and that's, I can do some stuff online, but it's become just kind of not a thing until that gets worked out. But yeah, reading. I used to read more. I think my focus has slipped this past year, and I've been getting through fewer books and more games. So those are the main ways, though. I also go for walks, which is also good for me, a little exercise. Kind of started doing that when we started not leaving the house at all every day.
Yeah, need to get outside for the sanity, for sure. That's when I started collecting indoor plants.
That's nice. All right, are we out of time? Oh, I'm out of time. I need to go at another thing. But thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation. And thank you for everybody for joining us.
Yeah, likewise. And click the link down below our faces here to buy books. And that's pretty great.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. It's great to talk to you, and look forward to new books. And thank you, everybody, for coming.